The village of Lusana rested beneath the shade of towering baobab trees, their ancient branches stretching like silent witnesses to the lives below. Among its many residents was a young girl named Miyanda, a child with a kind heart and a quiet strength. But kindness alone was not enough to shield her from the cruelty of the woman who ruled her home, Mama Zalika. Miyanda's mother had passed away when she was just a baby, leaving her with only whispers of a woman she barely remembered. Her father, Ekena, had remarried, hoping to give his daughter a mother's love, but instead he had unknowingly placed her in the hands of a heartless woman. Mama Zalika had a daughter of her own, Zuri, a girl who wanted for nothing. Where Zuri had fine clothes, Miyanda had rags. Where Zuri had warm meals, Miyanda had scraps. And where Zuri was showered with love, Miyanda was reminded, every single day, that she was unwanted. "You're nothing but a burden," Mama Zalika spat, her sharp eyes filled with disdain. "A useless little stray, eating food that isn't meant for you." Miyanda never spoke back. She never cried in front of them. But every night, when the house was silent, she would whisper to the stars, asking them if her real mother was watching, if she knew how much her daughter suffered. Ekena, her father, was a merchant who travelled for weeks at a time, returning only with gifts and warm smiles, never seeing the bruises on Miyanda's hands or the sadness in her eyes. To him, everything at home was as it should be. Mama Zalika made sure of that. One fateful night, as the crickets sang their lonely songs, Mama Zalika met with a man in the shadows. His name was Baba Musa, a trader known for dealing in things no decent man would touch: gold, stolen goods, and people. "I have a girl for you," Mama Zalika whispered, her voice cold. "Take her far away. Sell her. I don't care where." Baba Musa grinned, his teeth yellow in the moonlight. "And the price?" "Nothing. Just take her out of my sight." Miyanda, who had been returning from fetching water, stopped dead in her tracks. Her heart pounded as the truth crashed over her. She was to be sold, thrown away like an old rag. She turned and ran, her bare feet pounding against the dirt path. If she could reach her father's study, maybe she could write him a letter. Maybe she could tell someone, anyone. But before she could slip inside, rough hands grabbed her from behind. "You little rat!" Mama Zalika hissed, dragging Miyanda by the arm. "You were spying!" "No, Mama! Please don't do this!" Miyanda cried, struggling. "Let me talk to Papa." "He won't let you." Mama Zalika's face twisted in fury. "That fool, he won't be back for weeks, and by then, you'll be long gone." She shoved Miyanda into the small storage shed behind the house and bolted the door. Miyanda pounded on the walls, screaming for help, but no one answered. No one ever did. The night stretched into dawn, and Miyanda, exhausted from crying, sat curled in a corner. She listened as the world outside woke up. The clucking of chickens, the chatter of villagers. Then came the sound of hooves. A deep voice rumbled, "Where's the girl?" The lock clicked, and before Miyanda could react, Baba Musa loomed over her. His hands were rough, his grip iron-like as he dragged her out. "Mama! Mama, please!" Zuri's voice called from behind, her face pale as she watched her stepsister being taken. Mama Zalika yanked her daughter inside. "Don't look! This is none of your concern." Miyanda kicked and screamed, but no one came to help. No one stopped Baba Musa as he threw her into the back of his ox cart, covering her with a thick cloth. The cart rolled forward, leaving behind the only home she had ever known. As the village faded into the distance, Miyanda clutched her knees to her chest, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. She was alone, sold, and heading toward a future darker than she could ever imagine. The journey was long and painful. Miyanda sat in the back of Baba Musa's ox cart, her wrists tied, her face streaked with dried tears. The road was rough, making her body ache with every bump. She could hear Baba Musa humming as he drove, completely unmoved by her misery. At first she had begged him to let her go. She had promised she would never tell anyone what he had done. But Baba Musa had only laughed. "You are nothing now, girl. Just something to be sold." Days passed. Miyanda barely ate the stale bread he threw at her. She stopped crying because there were no more tears left. Her body was in the cart, but her heart had stayed behind in Lusana, in the small home where she had once dreamed her father would protect her. Then, one afternoon, the cart finally stopped. The air smelled different here, thick with spices, smoke, and sweat. When Baba Musa yanked her forward, she saw where she was. the city of Nkondo. It was nothing like Lusana. The streets were alive with noise, traders shouting, donkeys braying, musicians playing drums. People walked fast, their faces serious, their hands carrying goods. Miyanda had no time to take it all in. Baba Musa dragged her through the crowd, past shops and stalls, until they stopped in front of a large house. The doors were tall, guarded by men who barely spared her a glance. Inside, the air was cooler, but Miyanda shivered. The house smelled of polished wood and burning incense. It was quiet here, too quiet. A man stood in the center of the room, waiting. He was tall, with sharp eyes and deep scars on his hands. His clothes were fine, but his expression was unreadable. Miyanda's heart pounded as he stepped closer. Baba Musa grinned, pushing her forward. A strong one, this girl. She will work hard. The man studied her. His dark eyes moved over her face, her trembling hands. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. She will do, he said finally, his voice flat. Miyanda swallowed hard. What would he do to her? She was handed over like an object, like she wasn't even a person. Baba Musa left with a heavy bag of coins, never looking back. Miyanda stood there small and scared, in a house that was now her prison. Days passed. Miyanda had expected beatings, worse than Mama Zalika's, but the man, Omari, they called him, never hit her. Still, he watched her, always watching. She did her chores in silence, afraid to speak. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't kind either. He was just studying her. One evening she brought him food, placing the plate down carefully. Before she could leave, his voice stopped her. "Where are you from?" Miyanda hesitated. Why did he care? But she had no reason to lie. "Lusana," she whispered. "My father was Ikena." The room changed. Omari stiffened. His breath caught. His eyes locked onto hers, searching, questioning. "What did you say?" His voice was different now. Not flat, not cold, just shaking. Miyanda blinked. "Ikena, he is my father." Omari turned and rushed to the other side of the room. He opened a wooden chest and pulled something out with trembling hands. A small, beaded bracelet, old, worn. "Have you seen this before?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Miyanda gasped. She knew that bracelet. It looked just like the one her father always wore. Omari's hands clenched around it. His eyes burned with something deep, something raw. "This was my father's," he murmured, "before I was taken from him as a child." Miyanda's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't look away from the bracelet in Omari's trembling hands. It was the same design, the same beads her father always wore. But how could this man have it? Her mind raced. Could it be number? It wasn't possible. Omari's voice broke the silence. "My father gave me this when I was little. I barely remember his face, but I remember his name, Ikena." He swallowed hard. "I was taken from him when I was 5 years old." Miyanda's breath caught. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "My father, he never spoke about losing a son." "Because he thought I was dead," Omari said, his voice thick with emotion. "I spent years trying to find the truth. Every time I got close, the trail went cold. And now you are standing here, telling me Ikena is your father." Miyanda's legs felt weak. She grabbed the edge of a table to steady herself. "Then, that means you are my brother." The words felt strange on her tongue. Omari stared at her, his face unreadable, his eyes filled with something she had never seen before, hope. "Yes," he whispered, "you are my sister." The room spun. Tears filled Miyanda's eyes, blurring her vision. She had spent her whole life feeling alone, treated as an outsider, unloved by the only mother figure she had ever known. But now, in the most unexpected way, she had found something she never thought she had, a brother. A sob escaped her lips, and before she knew it, she was crying, her body shaking with emotions too big to hold inside. Omari didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. He held her tightly, as if he was afraid she would disappear. "You're not alone anymore," he murmured. "I swear, I will never let anyone hurt you again." Miyanda clung to him. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. Omari pulled back, his jaw tightening. "That woman," he said, his voice darkening. "Mama Zalika. She sold you like an object. She ripped you away from your home. She has to pay for what she's done." Miyanda wiped her tears. She thought of the years of cruelty, the nights of hunger, the way Mama Zalika had looked at her with nothing but hatred. But most of all, she thought of her father, how he had been tricked, how he had no idea his daughter had been stolen right under his nose. Omari turned to his guards. "Prepare the horses. We leave for Lusana at dawn." His voice was sharp, full of authority. This time, the truth will come out. Miyanda's heart pounded. She was going home. And this time, she wasn't going back as a helpless girl. She was going back with her brother. And together, they would make sure Mama Zalika never hurt anyone again. Omari placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm, reassuring. No one will ever take you from your family again. The sun had barely risen when Omari and Miyanda rode into Lusana. The village was still waking up, smoke rising from early morning fires, the scent of roasting maize filling the air. But as soon as the first villager spotted them, everything changed. People stopped in their tracks, eyes widening. Whispers spread like wildfire. Is that Miyanda? But she was taken. And who is that man with her? More villagers gathered, forming a crowd around the caravan. Omari sat tall on his horse, his expression unreadable. But Miyanda could feel his anger simmering beneath the surface. She gripped the reins tightly, her heart pounding. She had dreamed of coming home, but not like this. The door of a small hut creaked open. Mama Zalika stepped outside, stretching, unaware of the scene before her. When she finally looked up, her body went stiff. Her eyes locked onto Miyanda, then flickered to Omari, then back to Miyanda. For the first time in her life, Miyanda saw fear in Mama Zalika's eyes. "Miyanda!" Her voice cracked. "You should be gone!" Omari swung down from his horse. "And yet," he said, his voice cold, "here she stands, stronger than ever." Mama Zalika's face drained of color. This is a mistake," she stammered, stepping back. "I don't know what lies she's told you." But Omari wasn't listening. He turned to the crowd, his deep voice ringing out like thunder. "Mama Zalika sold her own husband's daughter. She handed Miyanda over to a man who trades in human lives." Gasps filled the air. Neighbors who had turned a blind eye now murmured among themselves, their faces filled with shock and shame. Ikenna, just returning from his travels, pushed through the crowd. His dusty robe clung to him, his tired eyes scanning the scene. When he saw Miyanda standing there, tears welled up in his eyes. "My child, is it really you?" Miyanda nodded, unable to speak, choking on her emotions. Then Ikenna turned to Mama Zalika, confusion twisting into rage. "You did this?" His voice trembled. "You sold my daughter." Mama Zalika dropped to her knees, her hands clasped together. "I did it for us," she cried. "She was a burden. I only wanted to make life easier." Ikenna's face hardened. "No," he said. "The only burden here is you." Silence fell over the village. The elders stepped forward, their faces grim. After a long moment, one of them spoke. "Mama Zalika, for your cruelty, for your betrayal, you are banished from Lusana. You will leave and never return." Mama Zalika's eyes widened. "Please, no, I have nowhere to go." She looked around desperately, but the villagers turned their backs on her one by one. No one spoke for her. No one defended her. Zuri, standing in the crowd, looked at her mother with tears in her eyes. But instead of following her, she stepped forward and took Miyanda's hand. "I don't want to go with her," she whispered. "I want to stay with you." Miyanda squeezed her hand, her heart full. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. She had a father who loved her, a brother who protected her, and even a sister who had finally chosen the right side. Mama Zalika let out a wail, but no one listened. She stumbled to her feet, cast one last desperate look at the village, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. Miyanda exhaled slowly. The nightmare was over. She was home. Ikenna pulled Miyanda into his arms, holding her tight as if he was afraid she might disappear again. His body shook with silent sobs, his tears wetting her shoulder. "I thought I had lost you forever," he whispered, his voice breaking. Miyanda clung to him, feeling the warmth, the love she had missed for so long. She had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was real, it felt even more powerful than she had imagined. Omari stood beside them, watching with soft eyes. He placed a strong, reassuring hand on Miyanda's shoulder. "You are home now," he said firmly, "and no one will ever take you from us again." Miyanda looked up at him, her heart full. She had a brother she never knew existed, a father who had never stopped loving her, and a village that now welcomed her with open arms. Days passed, and Lusana began to change. Omari chose to stay, using his wealth and influence to help the village thrive. He built new wells, brought traders from the city, and made sure no child in Lusana ever suffered as he and Miyanda had. Miyanda no longer felt like an outcast. The villagers, once indifferent, now greeted her with kindness. Children ran up to her, laughing, asking her to tell stories. She found a new friend in Zuri, who stayed by her side, making up for all the years they had been apart. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in hues of orange and gold, Miyanda sat outside with Omari and Ekena, watching the village come to life. For the first time in years, she felt truly safe, truly at peace. She took a deep breath, letting the warm air fill her lungs. She was once a girl lost in darkness, but now she stood in the light, stronger than ever. If you loved this story, there's more waiting for you. Click on the next video and keep the journey going. And don't forget to subscribe. More thrilling tales are just one tap away.